There are 4 stages of learning any skill, but today we're going to talk about selling and sales management. Number 1, you don't know you don't know. You're unconsciously incompetent. And you go out and make some sales calls, and all of a sudden you know you don't know because people have asked you all these questions. They've asked you pricing and asked you about your competitor, and you know you don't know. So you're consciously incompetent. And then if you stick around long enough, you become consciously competent. You know, and your confidence soars, and you stay with the job, and finally you get to stage 4. You've forgotten what you know, and you're just doing it. So you're unconsciously competent. And at that point, they ask you to become the sales manager. You're minding your own business, you're selling up a storm, and bam, someone comes into your office and says, you're doing so well, we'd like you to manage the rest of our team. And now we've got you. You've forgotten what you know, and you're trying to train and develop people that don't know they don't know. I always call the new sales manager the forgotten rookie because he or she gets promoted for doing sales. And now they have to develop the people who develop the top line revenues at the company. And they don't really know how to do that. So if you think about it, the paradox of management is that you get paid for doing less of what you got promoted for doing more of. And that brings us to a model that I think is very helpful for sales managers, the sales management trap. Because throughout my career, in my own sales management career, and observing the careers of other sales managers, they get stuck. Because as soon as you get promoted, your boss says, now we want you to keep selling. We don't want you to quit servicing and selling your clients, but we want you to manage these other people. And so you get stuck doing what I call the sales job, the non-management duties. So you're carrying your own account list or selling to your own territory. Maybe you're handling the regional and national business for your company. And you get stuck doing that. You spend 80, 90% of your time doing that. So the stage 3 and 4 tasks get short shrift. You don't have time to coach. You don't really have time to train and plan a good training session. So you get stuck in stage 1 and 2 activities. You're always fighting those fires. You're working with the salespeople, you're conducting some meetings, but you're not getting to the level 3 tasks of developing the people who develop your top line revenues. And over the years, I've talked to sales managers about how do you gnaw your way out of this trap, because you keep getting pulled back into these stage 1 and stage 2 management tasks without doing the human resource and the strategic market planning that you need to do. So let me give you 3 escape mechanisms for now. Number 1, plan and schedule your higher level tasks first, early in the week. Think about what you're going to do and look at the sales management trap and say, who do I need to coach? Who do I need to develop? Who do I need to mentor this week? And even if you're only going to spend 10% or 20% of your time in those stage 3 activities, it's very critical that you plan those in before your week starts, before the fires start to develop. So think about those stage 3 and stage 4 tasks early in the week. Plan those first. Now the second thing is quit fighting fires you didn't start. You need to coach your people when they come into your office to come up with a plan for putting out their own fires. Now, I don't know how long a got-a-minute meeting is in your company, but you have those, don't you? Even in Australia, got a minute? Got a minute? In my experience, most got-a-minute meetings are at least 15 minutes. I had an employee come into my office one day and she said, you got a second? She was too afraid to ask for a minute. So that meeting, as I recall, lasted 91 minutes because there was a pretty big fire to put out. But the key thing here is when people say, got a minute, most managers want to fix the problem instead of coach their people to solve their own problems. They think they'll save time. But what you're really doing by giving all the answers is teaching people, training people, when you have a problem, come to me, I'll fix it for you. And so you spend hours and hours putting out other people's fires instead of developing people to put out their own fires. So we're going to talk a little bit more about coaching later on in the program, but think about not always jumping in and fixing things for people. And escape mechanism number 3, get on the same page as your boss. And one of the reasons I've given you this little handout today, and you've got the sales management trap to take back to your company, and you sit down with your boss and say, what's my job? Here's the sales management trap. You sent me to this seminar, and I think I need to be at a higher level. I need to be doing more stage 3 and stage 4 sales management behaviors. What do you want me to do? And the question you're really asking is, what's my job and how am I doing? And the big idea is you need to get job clarity for yourself. You need to know what your manager expects. And your manager, your boss, needs to know what good sales management looks like, because most people who promote you may not have done the job, and they don't know what the sales management job entails. It's not just going out and carrying your own list or selling to your own territory. So what's my job? How am I doing? There was an article in the Harvard Business Review years and years ago, and it says job clarity is one of the key motivators. When I know what I'm supposed to do and how to do it, I'm more motivated to go do that job. So get on the same page as your boss. I want to talk a little bit about the 12 questions. The 12 questions come from the book First Break All the Rules by Buckingham and Kaufman. And the 12 questions are something you give to your team, and you hope that they strongly agree with all 12 of the questions the way they're posed. And so, do I know what's expected of me at work? Do I have the materials and equipment I need to do my work? At work, do I have an opportunity to do my best every day? And so on. So you've got these 12 questions, and I put that list of questions in your handout. But the big idea is that work units where the employees say strongly agree to the most questions, those work units are the most profitable. One of the examples in the book was Marriott hotels. Now, they might have a Marriott hotel at the airport and a Marriott hotel in the city. And they have the same systems, they have the same training, but where the manager manages so that people answer these 12 questions, I strongly agree, those units where most of the employees strongly agree with the 12 questions are the most profitable. And so one of the things you might think about is, could I manage this way for a quarter, for a half a year, for a full year, and then give these 12 questions to my team and see if they all strongly agree with the answers? So it's an interesting way to think about management. Manage so that your employees will answer the 12 questions, strongly agree. So 12 questions. As we move forward in this, as a manager, you really have 3 considerations as you go about the job of sales management. And I call these the stages of your organization, the stages of your people, and your own preferred management style. And so if you think about this, the stages of your organization, and we look at the way an organization develops. You start a company. And I know Sarah and I started our company with 2 people. So we formed the company, and then we stormed. Who's going to do this? Who's going to make the copies? Who's going to talk to the professionals? And all of a sudden, norm. We have a way of doing things. We have a culture. We have some employees. And now we start into profitability. We're performing. And then something happens. Something happens. And so whenever something happens, it's called reform, and you go right back into a storm. And so if you think about management, it's really perpetual whitewater. There's always something going on. There's always something to fix. There's always a new competitor, or there's a new problem, or the economy has a glitch. And so you reform, and now there's a storm. And you have to lead people through the storm, back to the norm, up to perform, and then something will happen again, and you just keep doing this. This is about your whole management career, is leading people forward to normal. And I think the interesting thing that I've always said is things will never go back to normal. They will always go forward to normal. But a lot of people would like to think things are always going to be the same. So I have on this next graphic the change model. And whenever there's change, you change the compensation system, you paint the office a different color, or you do something, you bring in a new manager, you bring in a new person, there's always change. There are 4 passages that people go through when you start to change things. The first stage is denial, because most people, when there's change, want to cling to the past. They want to cling to the old way of doing things. I like the old way. I like the old system. I like the old computer. I like the old paint. And so there's that denial and clinging to the past. And then they go through the next phase, which is looking inside and thinking, I'm going to quit. And they get into resistance. They don't show up. There's a lot of absenteeism. So, or maybe they go public with their discontent and have the meeting after the meeting at the coffee shop around the corner. And so there's resistance. And then if they're going to stay and adapt to this change, they'll go into some exploration. Well, I guess it's not that bad, and maybe I should stay. And they explore new ways of doing business, and ultimately they'll get it to what we call recommitment. But most of us as managers, when we announce a change, want them to go right to recommitment. And we don't think that they go through these passages or stages of dealing with the change. And so if you're managing change, and especially if you think back to that last model, the storm, you need to do some things. When people are in denial, you need to feed them information. Here's why we're making this change. Great leaders use the word because a lot. So here's why we're doing this. And then when they're in resistance, you need to be a sounding board. You need to be the person who just listens and lets them complain. You don't judge them. You don't try to correct them. Let them vent. Sometimes when people get things off their chest and are listened to, they can move on. But if you say, oh, it's fine, it's not fine. They need to go through that process. And then as they go into exploration, that's when you have brainstorming meetings and you ask their opinions, and we try to get lots of ideas generated about the new way of doing business. And ultimately you get to recommitment, where people are with you, they're cohesive again, they're motivated, and that's the time to have a celebration, whether it's bring in some pizza or just bring people together and thank them and acknowledge that you've gotten through some change as a team. So as a leader, you're always managing people through change. They're going through these 4 stages, and it's important to know that. So just for fun, think about a change you've made in your company over the last 6 months, and just see if you can remember how people went through this transition curve from denial all the way through to recommitment. See if this model fits, and then think about applying it the next time you change something in your operation. So that's the stages of your organization. We said the stages of your organization, the stages of your people, and then your own preferred management style. So if you think about your people, you could label them level 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm thinking specifically of salespeople that you're managing now. So 1, 2, 3, 4 is not a bad way to think about it. But you could also put some names on that: novice, or rookie, novice, learner, competent, not great, but middle of the road. Can sell, but isn't tearing up the place. And then pro. I mean, you might even want another circle or oval, and it could be promotable. But let's just use these: novice, learner, competent, pro. And so the way you manage those people are different. We'll talk about that, because you need to have different management techniques and different emphases for the way where your people are in their journey. The other thing I've done, and this is from my book, The Accidental Salesperson. We're spending most of the time talking about the accidental sales manager today. But in the accidental salesperson, I have the chart. And the chart looks at the kinds of relationships your people are having with their clients, and also the way that they think about the job and approach the job. And so I'd like you to take about 30, 40 seconds to look at the chart that's in your handout, and I'll be quiet. the big idea here is, can you see your salespeople at different levels with different customers? And then can they use the chart to analyze some of the relationships they're having? When we do this for a full day, we would have salespeople sit down and discuss, what can I do with this chart besides leave it in my handout? I was doing a seminar in St. Louis for Uniglobe, which is United Van Lines and their logistics companies. And one of the salespeople came up to me and said, I'm so happy to meet you. I have your book. And one day I had this tough customer, and I took him a copy of the chart from your book. And I said, Bill, what kind of relationship would you like to have with me? Look at this chart and tell me how you'd like to deal with me. And the client said, you want to do that right now? He said, no, I just want you to tell me, I think I could be of much better service to you if you'd let me in on a few more things. I'd like to be at level 3 with you, but I feel like we're at level 1. Just tell me in a couple of weeks how you want to work together with me. He said 2 weeks later, the relationship had totally changed because he defined what good looks like in a relationship with a salesperson. So the chart, a lot of our clients put this on the wall of their cubicle. They use it to evaluate meetings they've just had. They use it to plan meetings they're going to have and say, can I take this meeting to the next level by doing some things in column 3 and column 4. So the chart is a useful tool if you don't simply leave it in your handout. So I hope you find that beneficial. So we've talked about the stages of your organization, the stages of your people, and then you've got your own preferred management style. And you have in your handout the statement exercise. And the statement exercise has the directions. It really looks at your beliefs about people and managing people. And once you've done this exercise, you'll find whether you tend to be a humanistic manager or more of an autocratic manager. And you can look at that. There's an appendix that gives you the evaluation. You can look at your own style. But the big thing here is you need awareness of what are your tendencies. Now, the tendency for most salespeople who get promoted into management is just leave me alone. And when you're consciously competent or you're unconsciously competent and you're succeeding, you're making your quota, you don't need an autocratic manager. You just need a manager who says, way to go. But when you're a brand new person, you need a manager to lay down the law, to get to work on time, make these calls, dial the phone this many times. Here's your script for voicemail. Here's what you do when they say this. So you need someone who's on you, more of an autocrat. It could be a benevolent autocrat. It doesn't have to be a mean autocrat, but somebody needs to lay down the law and set the rules. So your tendency, if you're humanistic, is you don't confront negative behavior nearly soon enough. So we'll get to that in a second. So take this statement exercise after this program, back at your own desk, you just see what your tendencies are. So if we think about adjusting your management style based on the situation your organization is in and based on your people, it would look something like this. We'll look at your organization. So you got form, storm, norm, perform, and reform. And when you're early in the business or you're storming, there's been some big change, you need more complex systems. As you get into performance, simple systems will suffice. As far as standards, you need higher standards when you're in performance and lower standards, minimum standards, but lower standards when you're storming and forming. And as you move toward norm and perform, sometimes the salespeople themselves will set higher standards for themselves instead of you having to impose minimum standards. That's what you're hoping for in performance. And then as far as structure goes, and when I talk about structure, these are the hours. Here's how long you have for lunch. Here's the mandatory meetings you have to go to. It's very tight structure as you're forming and storming, and as you norm and start to perform, then you loosen some of the structure. You need a long lunch? You want to play golf on Thursday afternoon? Have you made your quota? Fine with me, because you don't need all the rules when everything's going fine. So then we have the last one, value decisions. What's our mission? What are our key values as a company? And in the beginning, the boss sets those because the new people aren't competent enough to contribute. But as you get into performance, you want to involve the group, the team. What are our core values as a team? What is our mission as an organization? And the more people that participate in that, the more ownership that you have. So that's the way you tighten and loosen things based on the stages of your organization. So even if you're a humanistic manager, sometimes you need to be more autocratic when things change and people get into the storm. And if you think about your people, you need to adjust your management style based on where your people are. And we'll look at that. We've got the novice, learner, competent, and pro. And if we think about motivation, you want the novice and the learner motivated for compliance. Just do what I tell you. And you want the competent and the pro motivated for commitment. You want them to be committed to the task, to the company, to you, to their career. So motivate for commitment instead of compliance when they're at a higher level. Now we have the support. And when I say support, I'm talking about praise. And sometimes we praise new salespeople, the novice, for just making a sale. It could be a small sale. And we really don't want to get too excited about little deals. It's nice that they closed a sale. It's nice that they did some things. But we don't want to celebrate too much when people are doing small things. Acknowledge them, but you want minimum support for new people. And I'll get to the opposite of that in a second. With veterans and with professionals and competence, you want to ring the bell. You want to praise them when they bring in that new business. You want to take them to lunch. You want to thank them. You want to publicly acknowledge if that's what they like, or privately acknowledge if they're private people. But tell them you really appreciate what they did. So maximum support for the pro, minimum support for the novice and the learner. However, you give the pro minimum direction and the novice and learner maximum direction. In other words, you're going to spend time with them, guiding them, helping them. So you're not ignoring them. You're just making sure that they're on course. The time that you give them is direction instead of support and praise. So you really spend your time maximum direction with those lower level people. And finally, we'll look at power. And we have two kinds of power. We have position power and personal power. And personal power is what you use with the pro and the competence. It is, I need your help on this. I'm going to announce a new change in our policy at the sales meeting on Monday. And I don't want you rolling your eyes. I don't want you heavy sighs. I want you to support me on this one. I'll take care of you later, but I want you to back me up on this. And I think all of us in our management career have looked to our top people to back us up. And, with the novice and learner, you can be more of an autocrat. See what it says on my business card here? Sales manager. What does it say on your card? Oh, you're a salesperson, so I'm your boss. So, I wouldn't say it exactly that way, but that's position power. And when people are on probation, when people are new, you can lay down the law because you're trying to keep them from failing. But when people are succeeding, you need to use personal power to get them to do what you need them to do. So that's the way you shift as a manager. And if you tend to be an autocrat, you'll do really well with the new people, but you'll lose the competence and the pros because you overmanage them. We talk about micromanagement. We talk about just treating everybody the same. And if you do that, you'll see turnover in your organization. So those are the three considerations: the stages of my organization, which we did first, the stages of my people, and then my own preferred management style, and how you adjust that based on the people and the organization and your own style. And I think that's a helpful model. Now, some people might be thinking, that's very theoretical, but a very wise man once said, there's nothing more practical than a good theory. And so I hope you can apply this theory to your own team as you go back to your own company. The coaching imperative. We talked about the sales management trap, and one of the stage 3 activities is coaching. And I think of all the things that you do as a sales manager, if you don't have time to do anything else, coaching is the imperative one to do. Because coaching is the way you develop people. And I love this definition. Coaching is a system of staff development that allows the subordinate to learn by a process of discovery through discussion and hands-on experience. And I think the trouble is that most of us think of coaching as an athletic thing. And we think about a football coach in America or any kind of a soccer coach, a regular football coach, laying down the law and yelling and screaming. But as a manager, that's not what coaching is. So don't think of the sports analogy. Think in terms of developing the people and getting them to think. So the rule I have about coaching, the number one rule, is ask 7 questions before you give people an answer. And it's one of the most interesting things you'll ever do. Because when people come into your office and say, got a minute? And you say, yeah, come on in. And they lay out the problem that they're having, your tendency is to want to go in and fix the problem. But if you sit there and say, that's interesting. What have you thought about doing about this? What else? What do you think the consequences would be if you actually did that? And they keep talking, and then you listen and ask them another question. And it's been my experience that after 7 questions, most people will come up with their own answer. And their answer will be something that they buy into because, as one of my mentors said, people rarely resist their own ideas. Now, they'll resist your ideas if you tell them what to do, but if they come up with their own solution, they're more motivated, more committed to go out and implement that idea. And I remember I wish it were early, it was 1,000 seminars into my career as a professional speaker. I heard this quote from Socrates, and he said, I can't teach anybody anything. I can only get them to think. And I went, wow. If I could simply get people to think about their job, to think about how they can apply these principles to what they're doing, that's really what a seminar is good for. And I can't do all lecture. I've got to get more discussion. And in a 6-hour seminar, we do half of it as discussion and reflection based on questions that we pose. So think about that. I can't teach anybody anything. I can only get them to think. And if you ask people 7 questions, they start to think. And in the 6th and 7th question, they're going deeper because the obvious answers aren't big enough. You're probing and you're getting them to dig deeper into their knowledge bank. And all of a sudden, they come up with a brilliant answer. And here's the thing. It took you, 10, 15 minutes to ask 7 questions and listen? But now, you've taught them how to solve this problem on their own. So they don't have to bring you that problem or that fire anymore. So it's really a time management benefit to sales managers to coach instead of solve problems for people. Think about what Socrates said, and my late colleague Norm Goldsmith was fond of saying, you can't influence someone's thinking until or unless you know what they're thinking. And so if you're not asking questions and getting into their head, you really can't influence the thinking of the people who report to you. So think about that. Think about the rule of asking 7 questions. If you implement that next week, you'll find that it's magical. So when I think about training versus coaching, you think about training and telling the new people what to do, but you really want to go into coaching mode as people are in competency and they're competent or they're pros. You want to coach those people instead of tell them what to do. So it's kind of a sliding scale, just like in management. I'm going to tell the novices more, but I'm going to ask the more experienced people more questions. So telling versus asking. Setting new standards and surpassing old limits. And this one of the most difficult things that I've ever wrestled with, and it really is wrestling with things. And so if you think about it, most companies, most sales departments just specifically, have wishes instead of standards. And when I consult with sales managers, I wish my people would make more calls. I wish my people would develop more new business. I wish we would ask for bigger dollars. I wish people wouldn't lower the price as quickly as they do. I had one CEO said that his salespeople sold harder in the sales manager's office than they ever did in the client's office. And that's one of the things that I would demand. You know, sell harder in your client's office than you do in my office. But I love this analogy, and this is an American football analogy and an American baseball analogy, but I know you have baseball there as well. We have the referee who can assess penalties, 5 yards, 10 yards, 15 yards for misbehavior. But we have umpires in baseball, and they only have two choices. They can listen to the manager argue or the player yell at them, and they have to take it unless someone spits at them or someone swears at them, and then they throw them out of the game. You're out of the game. So it's take it or you're out of the game. Or in football, the most violent sport, that'll be 5 yards, that'll be 10 yards, that'll be 15 yards. And so they give penalties that are proportionate to the behavior that was done. So it's not all or nothing. And I sometimes think as a sales manager, we feel like that umpire. I just got to take it. She's my top performer. I can't fire her. What do? I guess I'll let them walk all over me. So if you have standards, then you have more discipline. In fact, without standards, you really can't have a disciplined organization. So I'm going to give you the definitions. We talk about goals, objectives, or numbers, the number or plan, and that's a specific, measurable, attainable, challenging, time-bound what. And the word you're going to put in that blank in your handout, W-H-A-T. This is what we're trying to put out. This is the number we're trying to put on the board. This is what we're going for. So what we're trying to accomplish in terms of sales. It's expressed in dollars. A standard is a measurable indicator of performance involving consequences for non-performance. It's the how we're going to do it expressed as in activity and performance metrics. So a standard is a measurable indicator of performance. And there are 4 kinds of standards: quality, quantity, timeliness, and cost standards. We'll get to those in a second. Then the expectations, constant progress toward the standards, and the reality, what's really happening in my organization, and then the red flags, lack of progress toward the standard. So if you take a look at your notes, I mean, you can have quantity standards. How many prospects do you have in process? How many new business moves did you make this week? How many lunches have you had with customers? How many service organizations have you joined? But we also have quality standards. What's the dress code? What kind of proposals are you making? Is somebody proofing your proposals for typos? Are you having level 2 and 3 meetings and level 2 and 3 preparation for those meetings? Timeliness. How fast are you returning phone calls and voicemails? How fast do you get back to people by email? How many days is it between the time you meet with someone and find out their needs that you're back for a proposal? So days between needs analysis and proposal. And then the cost standards. Maybe there's a minimum order that you can't ask for anything less than this when you make your presentation. Or don't take the C clients to the $100 lunches. So cost standards. So all of these can be standards in your operation, but the reality is you really need to know what's happening before you impose standards. And sometimes if you involve your team in developing standards for the team, they'll come up with standards that are higher than you might impose on them. But I can remember talking about standards in our Leadership Institute. It was a 4.5-day seminar that we would conduct with these executives, and we talk about standards. And then people would go back and say, we need standards, and they'd say, we need to make 15 presentations a week, without ever looking to see how many presentations they were making before they imposed the standard. So you need the reality, and then you need the input of the group before you finally have your standards. But then you can confront negative behavior and manage the gap, not the goal. And I have this little model that you can look at, and I want to show you how I think about it. And this is a standard that I've made up, but it's 4 proposals a week. And the proposal means I'm going to ask somebody for a specific amount of dollars and give them a valid business reason for spending that money. And so 4 proposals a week, 2 customers. It could be new customers or current customers that I'm trying to upsell. 4 proposals a week. And I've got that line for, I'm doing that every week. So it's a 5-week month. I'm going to make 20 proposals this month. So week 1, I've got this salesperson, and she makes 5 proposals. Wow, she's above standard. And the next week, she makes 3 proposals. So now she's got 8 in 2 weeks. So on average, she's meeting my standard. I don't need to have a discipline meeting. Everything's fine. And then on week 3, she only does 2 proposals. Now, when do I confront this negative behavior? Do I wait till she gets down to 1? Now she's really far behind and I have a gap. And so what I'm trying to do when I have this meeting is to close the gap. Mary, I need you to get more proposals next week. You did 5 in week 1, and now we're 2 or 3 behind. How can you catch up? Can you make 5 proposals for the next 3 weeks? Well, I don't know if I can make 5 proposals for the next 3 weeks. Can you make 5 this week, 4 next week, and 5 the week? Well, I think I can. Well, let me coach you on how to get in front of more people, because you're falling behind our standard. Now, there's no acrimony. There's no chastisement. When we talk about discipline, we're talking about course correction. We're talking about instruction. We're talking about training to get people back to the standard and not having a confrontation. We need to get back to where we agreed we needed to be. So getting back to standards. So without standards, there's really no discipline. And so this is more like being the referee, that you intercede when the behavior starts to diminish so that you can correct it before things get out of hand. So I love this analogy, gap management. And if you think about it, shovel the piles when they're small instead of waiting until things get so out of hand that you can't catch up. So setting new standards, surpassing old limits. And one word of caution, it's better to have a few standards that you really enforce than having dozens of standards that you never do anything about. Several standards are better than a bunch of standards, as long as you're willing to enforce it. So think about that. Now, the next concept is mentoring, and that's one of those stage 3 activities. And you have a page in your outline about my heroes mentoring and what mentors do. They set high expectations of performance, offer challenging ideas, help build self-confidence, etc. And I can remember as a very young radio advertising salesperson in Madison, Wisconsin, I was working on a piece of copy to go on the air. And we had to do carbon paper, if you remember those 40 years ago, carbon paper, 3 copies, and my boss came into my office and there were about 20 sheets of paper on the floor and carbon paper everywhere. He says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm working on the 7th draft of my piece of copy." He said, "Chris, your first draft is about 95% as good as it's ever going to get. And you are already one of the best copywriters we've ever had at this radio station. You need to get this on the air where it will help the client instead of keep putting it in the wastebasket and on the floor where it's doing no one any good. So get it on the air. You're one of our best writers. And I will tell you this, his name was Phil Fisher, my mentor, and he built so much confidence in me that day that I never doubted myself. And I was always doubting myself, but he saw something in me and he told me. So help build self-confidence. I mean, I've written 2 books, I've traveled the world doing seminars, but part of it was because as a young person, Phil molded me and helped me shape that attitude and shape the confidence. So I would ask you to look at this sheet and think about the things that on the sheet, and then who's done some of these things for you. Think about your mentors, and then think about your team and say, who have I done this for on my team? And then who do I need to do this for? This tool is a very powerful tool when you want to develop the people who develop your top line revenues, and when you want to get a sense of commitment and build confidence, but that commitment where they're doing things for you because you're mentoring them. This topic is the secrets of motivational speakers don't speak about. And I'll never forget the day I finished a 6-hour seminar on selling. And a woman came up to me and said, Mr. Lytle, you've really motivated me today. And I said, well, I wasn't trying to. And she said, I could hardly wait to get back to my company and get onto the street and implement some of these ideas that you've given me. And I said, well, I'm glad. And I thought, well, maybe, I was on the airplane flying home, and I thought, maybe I'm a motivational speaker. And I remembered seeing motivational speakers and thinking, they do an hour and a half, and they fly them in on a Gulfstream, and I'm flying in coach and doing 6 hours. Maybe I could become a motivational speaker. And I started studying motivation, and the first thing I saw was Peter Drucker. He said, we know nothing about motivation. All we do is write books about it. That didn't help. And then I read that Harvard Business Review article that said job clarity is an important motivator. And maybe that woman, when she left my seminar, was thinking, I know what to do. I know how to do it. I know how to make money by implementing this sales process that Chris taught. So maybe the motivation was job clarity. So as a very young consultant, I took on a management training program for the restaurant chain in the United States called Hardee's. And Hardee's is kind of like McDonald's, only about 1/20th of the size or less. But it's a chain of hamburger restaurants. And the owner, the franchisee, wanted to bring his store manager and assistant manager to Minnesota, Bloomington, Minnesota, and bring in a speaker, and they called me. And they said, could you do some management training for our restaurants? We've got 16 restaurants, and we'll be bringing in 32 managers. And I said, sure, why not? And so I put together this 3-hour session, and it was going great. 2.5 hours in, almost ready to fly home. And a woman raised her hand, and she said, may I ask you a question? And I was a young smart-aleck trainer back then, and I said, well, you just asked me a question. Do you have another one? And she said, yeah, I have another one. How do you manage a 16-year-old worker on minimum wage who could care less about working for you and would go across the street and work for another chain for 10 cents more an hour? How do you do that? And that's what we call in the training business, stump the trainer. And I can remember going to a seminar for people who do seminars, and the speaker said, if someone asks you a question that you don't know the answer to, form small groups and let the groups deal with the question. And I said, well, you're at your round tables. Let's talk about that at your tables. How do you manage? She said, wait a second. What are we paying you anyway? She said, answer the question. What's wrong with answering the question? And I remembered something that Ken Blanchard had written in one of his 1-Minute Manager books. He said, if you can't describe the problem in behavioral terms, you don't have a problem, you're just complaining. And I said, I used that quote in front of the group. I said, Ken Blanchard said, if you can't describe the problem in behavioral terms, you don't have a problem, you're just complaining. So in your groups, I'd like you to describe the level of behavior that you're getting, and then the behavior that you'd like to get. And if she was doing this, she would be motivated. If she's here, she's not motivated, and you're frustrated with her. And so she said, I don't need to get into our groups. Same woman. She said, she doesn't hustle, and I need her to hustle. And hustle is one of those words that it can mean different things to different people. If you're an athlete, it means one thing. If you're a drummer, it means another thing. And everybody has a different perspective and definition of hustle. It depends on your family background. So I said, what I'd like you to do is define what you mean by hustle so that you can explain it to this worker. And they had a little group discussion, and the same woman got up and she said, I think I understand. She said, this woman that I'm managing has to clear off tables during the busy lunch hours and dinner hours. Because if there's a ketchup stain or a coffee ring on the table, or people leave their bag behind, and there's not a clean table for a new customer, then our customers will go elsewhere. And in order to clear those tables, she has to come around from behind the counter where she's helping bag things, and then walk into the restaurant and then wipe down the table. And all I need is when she passes somebody sitting at another table, she'd make a slight breeze as she goes by them. I just need her to make a breeze when she goes by. That's all I need. And I said, well, can you measure the breeze? Because if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And if you're not measuring it, you're not managing it. She said, well, they have wind gauges. They talk about what's the wind speed? What is that, an anemometer? Yeah. I said, well, we could just put a napkin on the table and see if she could shift the napkin as she walks by. And if the napkin would flow in the breeze, that means she's made a breeze and the napkin moved. And of course, if the napkin flew off the table, she'd be really hustling. But if it just flutters, at least she's hustling enough. And I'll never forget, I got a letter. This is when people sent letters. And they said, we put a wind gauge in the back of our Hardys, and we put, we're the Hardys that hustles in a sign, and make a breeze when you go by. And she said, things changed. And I talk about job clarity because now I know what good looks like. I know that good means making a breeze. And I can make a breeze, but I didn't know that before. Nobody told me. Nobody told me what good looked like. And that's what I've really been trying to do through this whole presentation is what does good sales management look like? Getting to stage 3 and 4. What does good selling look like? It's getting level 3 and 4 moments when you're selling using that chart that I shared with you. And then how do you shift your management style based on the stages of your organization and the stages of your people? So I hope I've given you some clarity and that maybe you're a little more motivated to go back and apply some of these ideas. I like to think in terms of the productivity loop. And I love this quote from Frederick Hertzberg. I'm going to read it to you. Employees are motivated by their own interest, inherent need to succeed at a challenging task. The job of the manager then is not to motivate people to get them to achieve. Instead, the manager should provide opportunities for people to achieve so they become motivated. And if you think about that, the most motivated a salesperson is ever going to be is when he or she closes a big deal. I did it. Achievement is motivating. So you close the sale, and then you get paid. Here's a nice commission. I closed the sale, then I got paid, and then you go back, and the customer said, this has really solved some of my problems. This product, the service you sold me has really helped my business. And now you go, I helped someone. So your belief is higher in your ability to become a source of business advantage to other people because you help this client and you take that satisfied customer feedback, build your belief, and go out and close more sales, get more commission checks, get more happy customers, and you have a great career. So your job as manager is to help people succeed so they become motivated. I like this idea of the 3 powerful motivators. One is fear. You're on probation. I'm going to fire you if you don't get better. That's manipulative. The other is reward. If you sell more new business, we'll pay you more. So that's manipulation too. Not that you shouldn't pay people for doing things, but they need to go out and get new business because it's the right thing to do. And finally, building belief. The more you can build belief in your people, the more they will go out and behave the way you want them to behave. Because if I believe in what I'm doing, I'm going to go out and sell harder, sell better, and not be so deterred by a few objections or a few complaints, because I know that what I'm doing is really helping businesses. So your happy customers build belief, and your managers need to start building belief too. I think one of the great meetings is to bring in a happy customer to tell the new people how they're benefiting from what your company sells. And finally, I like Daniel Pink's 3 powerful intrinsic motivators: autonomy, the urge to direct our own lives; mastery, getting better and better at something that matters; and purpose, being part of something bigger than ourselves. And really, if you think about that, when you're part of a team that's really making a difference in the marketplace and you're filled with that kind of purpose, good things happen. So my purpose is to make successful people, successful managers, successful companies, successful sooner or more successful than you were when you met me. So I hope that that's worked for you today. One of my favorite National Speakers Association seminars or conferences was themed "The Privilege of the Platform." And while I wasn't on the stage in front of you today, it is a privilege to spend this time with you. Thank you very much.